I'll explain how we got to that title in a little while. So, Dave, thanks very much for that. That was really enlightening and very educational. And there were several things I picked out really in terms of, you know, just how complicated this is all is. And you know, the challenges we have of, you know, how we are going to get these messages across to the organizations that we work in. So I from the outset, I'm not a technical person, so I will be not diving into any sort of depth of technology. My role is to lead a team of people in developing a range of services that meet the needs of our customers, and I think in that respect we're very similar to, you know, most, you know, small to medium-sized public sector teams who are doing the same for their own organisations. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. So let me know if that works. Ah, wait a minute. Sorry, I should have put it onto. No, it's not going to let me do that.
It was working before, Nick. You just need to put it in SlideShare.
Yeah, but I can't. I try to put it into SlideShare, and then it.
Do you require my assistance?
Not yet. Let me just.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough.
Stumble on a little bit more first. What I will do is just minimize that. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so yeah, just so Nick first asked me about this session in the silly season leading up to Christmas, and I think we were both reminiscing on the fact that we'd had some time to enjoy the thick of it catch-ups during the COVID lockdown period. And if any of you aren't familiar with thick of it, it's I think it's BBC program originally, but there's a great character in it called Malcolm Tucker, and he's quite a challenging character. And when in one particular episode, when thinking about the future, he comes up with this great line, can the internet download rice? And for me, that was when Nick said, oh, do we want to do something? I thought, well, what's a really stupid title for a session that we wanted to run? So that's how we came to that title. In terms of what I want to go through in this session, I've already said it's not a technical perspective. This is going to be more around the challenges of conveying this sort of subject matter to the audiences we work with. Dave quite rightly made the point that, you know, if you're Sky trying to implement these sorts of solutions, you've got a relatively small number of use cases. In public service, we have not only a wide range of use cases, we have a wide range of skills of users, and we have the added complexity of having to take our leaders with us, whether they're councillors or senior management teams. And generally, public service organisations are very large and complex as well, which makes this even more challenging. So in a way of conveying that is really sharing our journey. Govmetric, as we explained at the beginning, many of you in the room use Govmetric, is a customer experience framework, monitoring the customer experience of accessing services. So we don't provide the access to the service itself. We work with people like Jardu and others for that. We capture the customer's experience of doing that. And in doing so, we feed into that continuous improvement loop as to you know, how that service could have been improved, what the good or bad aspects of that interaction were, and doing that in a systemic way so that right across the organization, across all the channels, all the services, we can start to build a picture of what's the citizen's experience. And I've used the word citizen there, and it is different because customer experience in the commercial world is all about a competitive environment. You know, there is a choice. Customers can go somewhere else. In the public sector world, in the public service delivery world, then we're talking about monopolies. We're talking about citizens who are stakeholders in those monopolies, but they're still monopolies nonetheless. So, you know, we take customer experience very seriously. We think it's in, you know, citizens accessing public services should have a similar level of ease of access, fulfillment of services, an enjoyable experience in accessing all of those. And you know, the sorts of frameworks that we build, the sorts of tools that we use, the sorts of you know, technologies that we combine to build those are key to that. So I'll talk a little bit about our journey, because our journey's gone on for quite a while now and it's evolving all the time. And the bit we're really interested in now is in how AI is going to help us deliver, you know, a higher level of service to our customers in handling their citizens. And I've got some examples of where we're starting to do that. I'll touch slightly on some external resources. So those of you who are familiar with the world of analysts will have heard of the likes of Gartner and Forrester and people like this. And they do provide us with some useful perspectives. It's very easy in the world of AI to get carried away with all of the technology and the buzzwords and, you know, these fascinating capabilities that are out there. But, you know, sometimes we just need to understand where we are on that journey and, you know, how valuable or what tangible benefits can some of those things deliver. So I'll talk a little bit about this. What this isn't, you know, this is a bit of a dump really in terms of where we're at the moment. So it's not any of these things in terms of, you know, well researched, thought through, authoritative. It's just a manager sharing his thoughts on how he's trying to take a team of people through this process. Nick, you mentioned we've got the transcription turned on, so it will be perhaps at the end of this session a bit of fun to take away that transcript afterwards and see what it makes of this conversation that we've been having. This mix of, you know, a group session, some detailed presentation stuff. You know, let's see what we get out of that.
Yeah, no, that's been done. So yeah, I can provide that post session.
Excellent, thank you. So back to this thing about rice. So I went to what is probably the world's greatest, most heavily invested AI platform and put in this this rather flippant statement of can the intellect download rice. And I was a little bit disappointed, really. I mean, in an ideal world, a real world, we would have had somebody just said, well, yes, it can, or no, you plonker, don't be so stupid. What we got here, of course, was a bunch of answers from, you know, largely broadband providers. I'm sure Hamble the Rice, which I think is down in Hampshire, is a very nice place, but it wasn't the answer I was looking for. And I think, you know, I just wanted to use this completely stupid example of a way that, you know, if we choose to challenge what is clearly very enabling and, you know, beneficial technologies with, you know, stupid questions or, you know, not the right sort of examples, then we're clearly going to trip up. And I've certainly been in situations where, you know, councillors have chosen not to know how to use a mouse just to thwart whatever message I'm trying to get across at the time. And I think, you know, these are the sorts of landmines that we need to stay clear of. So, you know, we are talking about a complex subject matter. I think the biggest challenge here is trying to make it relevant and trying to make it as simple as possible. And that's not helped actually. Then when I got the answer I got off Google, and then went over to actually put in artificial intelligence, up comes this this sort of summary from Google as to what artificial intelligence is. And again, you know, this imagery I think is very very difficult in terms of the expectations it's set. And towards the end I'll talk about stakeholders here, and we've got a very wide range of stakeholders in public service, from the elected members right through to the frontline staff. And you know, everybody's interpretation of buzzwords or terminology like this is you know, is potentially very challenging in terms of managing those expectations and you know, what those stakeholders might think. So I think the message here is to think about how we can really try and simplify this down to something that is relevant. So, you know, whether that's and going back to Dave earlier, you know, some very tangible, real examples that would work for, you know, service heads and you know, and practitioners, whether it's dealing with customers that handle staff. You know, it's going to be really difficult and needs all the help we can get from colleagues and communicators and managers and members in terms of how we position this, so that we don't walk into traps. So with that sort of bit of a health warning type positioning, I wanted to share the journey we've been on for the last 15 years now in terms of the Govmetric service, how that's evolving and how we're starting to incorporate AI into the product, and how that's becoming a more joined up and interconnected part of all of our customer services. So let me start walking through that. So as I said, there's a few organisations in the room use Govmetric. Govmetric was launched in 2006, primarily as a response to what was then the end of the e-government programme. So during 2000-2005, the government had invested the thick end of £1 billion into digital enablement of councils. And you know, a huge amount of money had been spent on CRM systems, web platforms, interconnecting technologies. And right at the end of that program, they came up with this concept of the e-service delivery standards, and we locked straight onto the one which was customer services. And this was all about what's the customer's experience of accessing these services. And from that point on, this has been, you know, what we live and breathe. So, you know, all of the improvement that we are building into our platforms, into how we handle customers, what's their experience of accessing those services and of receiving those services. And that started off as a really simple thing, and it's become a more comprehensive and complex thing. And that's the journey I'm going to talk through quite quickly. So in 2006, we teamed up with a group of 6 councils, and back then it was all about face-to-face, telephone and web, bit different to today's environment. And it was, you know, what's the channel volumes coming through on those respective channels. What are the services that customers are trying to access? And, you know, are they getting a good or a bad service? So in the top left-hand corner there was the original question set. It was, what's the service you're trying to access? What's the rating you would give to that service? And what's the reason why? It was all button presses. It was quantitative data. The same principles applied to the web, and the same principles applied to the telephone. So it was a very simple data set that we were capturing. It was a very simple interaction for the customer. You know, it was very light touch for them. And yet it gave us some good quantitative data that we could start to develop a trend over time in terms of what was happening. But even then, under the bonnet, we were starting to do a bit more. So we had the, you know, the three primary channels: face-to-face, telephone, and web. We were giving the customer that point of interaction, that sort of in the moment opportunity to give feedback on that interaction. We were able to categorize that interaction so that when we reported on it, we could report by service and by channel, and even potentially by interaction type. But what we're also doing behind the scenes, and which immediately gave some contextual added value to that data, was pulling in what we called back then the volumetric data. So pulling in information from queuing systems, from CRM systems, you know, in the face-to-face environment, pulling in on the telephone channel the call log files, and pulling in on the web channel the server log files. And so there we're starting to build a data set which is a combination of quantitative experience data, but also quantitative behavioral data, volumetric data. The biggest challenge then, and the biggest challenge now, is cleansing that stuff, especially the volumetric data, which we had less control of, bringing it into a database, being able to analyze that, and then being able to surface that out into reporting applications that our customers could access. And even then, not only referencing standards that were around at the time through ESD Toolkit, but also being able to share some of that data into some of the people that were using ESD Toolkit to start capturing an organization-wide view of what was happening to them. So jump forward a bit, 2010, and things were starting to get a bit more interesting. And this is where we start getting into this world of unstructured data. So we already were seeing value in being able to quantify what was happening to customers and their interactions, but we now wanted to start to hear it from from the horse's mouth. So we opened up all the channels to be able to capture verbatim feedback. And for the last 11 years, we've now been capturing verbatim feedback on all of the channels for all of our customers. And what that allows us to do is to start understanding not only where something is going wrong or right, but when that happens, why, and why is that from the customer's perspective, most importantly. So along that journey as well, the number of channels started to open up, and particularly with the qualitative aspect, we were able to start understanding a lot more about the customer's experience. The voice recordings bit was really interesting because that gave you not only what they were trying to say, but the emotion. You know, you could hear in their voices their frustration, their gratitude, their emotion. And that gave us some really valuable data to start working with. And that since has been something we've been able to start playing around with more. 2015, things started to get even more interesting. So we had a contact from a certain Mr. Varney at TFL, And he said, well, I really like what you guys are doing, but could you extend this into transport networks? And that was a really fascinating challenge. And again, from a data perspective, and you keep hearing coming back to this data, enriching the data, broadening the data, giving us more data points to work with. So we had two challenges here. One was to put customer feedback, real-time customer feedback, onto buses. What we did was we developed a unit that sat on the exit point of the bus, and as people got off the bus, they were able to give a very simple rating as to what their satisfaction level of that journey was. But from a data perspective, this was really interesting stuff. We were looking at bus routes, we were looking at into-town and out-of-town bus routes. We were looking at time of day, so we had the rush hour in the morning, the dip midday, a bit of a pickup towards lunchtime, and then the reverse of that situation as everybody started to go home again at the end of the day. TfL have got a fantastic data set, and we're able to start looking at things alongside this data, such as congestion. So starting to understand, were passengers' satisfaction affected by congestion? And of course they were, but also weather data. So, the weather happens, it impacts congestion. Congestion happens, it impacts journey times. And then starting to understand, what types of passengers were using the buses at which types of day, and even which bus stops they were getting off at when they gave their feedback, started to allow us to build a much richer understanding of those customer interactions. The other part of that project was to look at in-station feedback and to start getting a perspective of people using their very busy terminal hubs. We did a project at Stratford. Fortunately or unfortunately, this is where a lot of West Ham supporters get off or get on to buses. That enriched our profanities filtering database quite substantially in terms of the feedback we got there. We also had to have a few iterations of building a kiosk that could withstand West Ham at home. But all of those were learning experiences and gave us a huge data set to play with in terms of understanding passenger experience. And then sort of bring it up to today, really, in terms of where we're at. So in the world of understanding customers and their experiences, there is now a whole plethora of data that we're looking at using and considerations. So there's the solicited data that we've always captured through GovMetrics, so the quant data, the qual data. Increasingly, we're starting to see unsolicited data being brought into that mix. So when you're thinking about customer experience of accessing your services, they may tell you, or they may tell their mates on Twitter. We're starting to see observational data, especially in the digital channels. So massive opportunity now with the the COVID initiated move to digital, of being able to start mapping out journey analytics, observational data of how people are accessing services, and combining that and compiling it with the experience data that they either respond to a solicited request or gift through unsolicited. Structured and unstructured. So, we're all now used to working with structured and unstructured data sets and the respective wealth that they give us. Mobile and fixed, we're talking about customers accessing services in fixed locations, digital locations throughout the community, and that's going to open up some real interesting insights. the days of trying to build or do things through standalone systems are well and truly gone. And, you know, Dave was referring to lots of systems that they are connecting to, whether it's enabling applications from other partners or whether it's back office systems. You know, we are now in an interconnected, interoperable, meshed world of data. And that's only the stuff that we're dealing with internally. If we start looking at open data from outside, whether it's weather or congestion or whatever, then you know, we're talking about lots and lots of data. We need to be mindful, obviously, of the rights associated with data, and you know, AI has got some pretty bad stories associated with it already in terms of how we've abused or misused some of those data rights. We need to think very carefully about data sharing, you know, data frameworks, data trusts, data transfer mechanisms, how we contract that, how we socially contract that with our citizens. The need now to take this stuff into data warehousing and data analytics systems that live outside of our own applications. So whilst Govmetric has a data analytics capability, increasingly we're starting to see people wanting to take our process data and mash that up with other data from other applications outside of Govmetric. Speech to text, again, Dave, thank you for sort of elaborating on some of this earlier. We too have been trialing all of those platforms and you know, the different nuances or capabilities that they have, and the you know, the text analytics piece, and how important that is to all of this that we're doing. And so to conclude, I'm going to bring it back to that very first slide, but then add on, and I gave up really, because if I'd have added on everything that we now have to think about in this type of solution, then you know, we wouldn't have fitted it all in. But you know, and in this respect, this is where I bring back to what I was saying at the beginning, in that I see our journey as being very similar to yours. You know, we started off with some applications that were starting to do things. We saw all of this potential in terms of stretching that, opening it up, increasing it, and all of the parties that wanted to be part of that. So down the left hand side, whether it's, you know, bringing in that sort of unsolicited, unstructured insights from the social platforms, whether it's bringing in sort of mobile or you know, frontline operation type data, and you know, we're working with Highways England, police forces, passenger agencies, whether we are down at the bottom of the screen. You know, we're now in a world where all of this stuff is joined up via APIs. So, you know, it was quite interesting yesterday to hear some of the dialogue in the session, and this sort of, I hope, a tipping point that we've reached where everybody now understands the need to allow this data to flow. You know, if we don't allow this data to flow, then we've just got silos of data that, you know, where we're not getting value from it. The tool sets we've used, AWS, some niche operators like Speechmatics. We've played with IBM Watson. We've used Google AI, and I'm sure you will all be doing the same in terms of building your solutions accordingly. And then down the right hand side, you know, all of the reuse, the integration. So we've got integration now into Dynamics, where you know, customer service agents can fire off a feedback request as part of the case closing. We've got similar integration into FirmStep. We're working with IAG4 at looking at adding feedback automatically into those service requests. Increasingly, customers are wanting to surface this stuff up into Power BI. You know, most authorities now are looking at exploiting their Microsoft investment. So we're seeing a lot of requests for Power BI, but also, you know, different applications like Tableau. I mean, in the top right hand, you know, most recently with Highways England looking at opening up a graphical interface for soliciting feedback as well. So, you know, as more and more services get delivered through mapping interfaces, then having a way of being able to capture that feedback as well. So that's been our journey, and you know, I hope is the journey we're on over the next few years. I said I'd towards the end touch back to some authoritative analyst type stuff, and this is where I've referred to Gartner, and in our world we use Gartner and Forrester as the sort of the oracles on how is that technology evolving, and you know, what's the likelihood and the timing of when it's going to be deployed in the workplace. I apologize because you're not going to be able to see the detail of this on the screen, but Nick, if you can share the slides, then this is a really useful model. This has been used for decades now in terms of how Gartner look at new technologies, and pretty much they all follow a similar pattern. So we've got expectations on the vertical axis and time on the horizontal axis. And what we see here is any new technology, it comes out, it goes through its innovation trigger, it builds up to this, what they call the peak of inflated expectations. So this is where, you know, all of the future promises of this technology are. It then drops off down into what I love, which is the trough of disillusionment, in terms of, you know, and you know, whether this is Bitcoin or whether it's .com or whatever, you know, all technologies have gone through this sort of this curve, and then slowly after the hype's gone, we then see this strong and steady growth to where technologies start to become valuable and used. And I've used this several times to challenge people on, well, you know, yes, that's got lots of potential and lots of promise, but we're probably a while off yet that becoming a valuable and robust technology that delivers, you know, value now. So I'd urge you to look at this and, you know, see where the AI technologies are in their journey, which ones are delivering productivity now, which ones are coming up to delivering productivity, and you know, and use that as part of your decision making. So to finish, you know, we did a bit of a word cloud of stuff that we need to think about with the subject of AI, and you know, any one of these we could pick apart and spend a lot more time talking about. But you know, who are the stakeholders? What are their expectations? You know, if that's you know, the leader of a council, is this all about, you know, rationalization? You know, is digitalization all about reducing costs? If you're in the front line, you know, what's the WIFM, what's in it for me? You know, is my job at stake? What are the quality implications? What are the ethical aspects to consider in AI? You know, we're talking about algorithms here. Algorithms are only as good as how you set them up and how you run them and how you tune them. So, You know, if we've got dodgy algorithms, then we're going to have dodgy outputs. What bias are we building into our systems? You know, are we objective in them? Are we subjective? How do we control them? And so on and so on and so forth. So really just something to think about, and to bring us back to the beginning, which is, you know, the AI has, it's difficult to define. It means different things to different people. It has huge potential to deliver. It's difficult to describe and communicate to people. The potential for people misunderstanding is significant. So, you know, all of that really is what I think about when somebody mentions AI. And I guess, you know, that leads on to, what are your AI challenges? You know, it's a multifaceted discussion. So that's where I'll finish off, Nick.
Well, I mean, it was very, very thought-provoking, but I feel somewhat cheated because you've not actually answered the original question, which is, can the internet download rice? Well,
it just shows how my mind works, really. I start off in one place and I end up somewhere else.
Well, let's see. I guess with the you know, with the support of a 3D printer, yes, you could.
But would you want to, Nick? But would you want to?
Well, you know, I'm not a big rice fan, to be fair. If I needed to, I could pop down to my local co-op and get, you know, a bag of Uncle Ben's. But yes, you can download rice off the internet if you're that way inclined. However, what you have done is obviously sort of certainly it's thought-provoking. And I think, what are your AI challenges, or what do people think about trying to introduce AI into their organisation? Because I guess what we've talked about today is mainly sort of the conversational AI as opposed to the deep learning stuff. So people, I tell you what, Nick, if you stop sharing your screen so that we can become larger,
yes,
as it were, on the I'd just be interested, you know, let's I tell you what, I'm going to pick on Mike Ward first of all, because I know he likes, you know, he's been to a lot of sessions of mine. He doesn't mind me picking on him. Right, Mike, could AI, the sort of AI we've been talking about today, that Dave talked about and Nick's touched upon, that sort of thing, could that work in your organisation? Could you see it, you know, in a year's time? You know, South Hams and West Devon has an AI strategy of sorts.
Well, I was just thinking about, you know, there's the web, the initiating transactions via the web, sort of AI conversational stuff, as you mentioned. And I was sitting here then just racking my brains thinking, well, is there any sort of back office work that AI could do? And I thought about sort of, you know, problem we've had in CRM systems before, sort of duplicate record matching and things like that. Could AI replace the traditional sort of fuzzy matching that we've had to do with linking up, you know, records? You know, and could we introduce into the planning world, you know, which is very sort of labor intensive? I don't know, but I'm just wondering what other council functions, I don't know, invoice processing or something like that. Again, matching invoices, whether there's any scope or anyone's had any thought for introducing AI in those areas that could perhaps, you know, show some real, you know, savings.
Anyone that's got any thoughts on this at all, just unmute and jump on. This is an open conversation. So please, Mr. Wells, at East Riding, please feel free to unmute and get involved. Mr. Wardrop, if you want to rejoin us. Right, so I mean, let's talk about other service areas that, you know, obviously you guys I tell you what, I did want to ask you, Dave, this may be a spanner in your proverbial works, but so obviously we've talked about the use of Amazon Lex, and obviously the Jardo CXM platform, and you're sort of partnering, I guess, with Amazon. What if someone's came to you and said, Dave, I like the cut of your jib, I like what you're saying, but we don't have Jardo CXM, we have another platform. Are you able to support them and do stuff with that platform because of your knowledge of AWS, or would that not be possible?
Look at it. It may be possible. It depends upon where you want the information to go from Amazon into.
Right, okay.
Amazon's pretty good at being able to plug the information into another system. Getting it right, it was a challenge to get it right with CXM, and it's taken a hell of a lot of testing. I mean, it's 3 years of development to get it to be able to raise a case. So
right, okay.
What you've seen today is 3 years of active development to get it right.
Right, okay. Brilliant. That answers my my question. Anyone else? Paul, got any thoughts? By switching your camera on, you are automatically dragged into the conversation.
Just picking up on what Mike was saying there, and data quality and data kind of cleansing are perennial issues around kind of automation and service improvement, aren't they? Yeah. And AI can definitely help with that, I think. The extent to which the stuff that's available to us through our 365 subscription in cognitive services will help with that is yet to be established, but we're just starting to put our toe in the water on that. And in the spirit of what Dave was saying earlier, I'm all up for sharing learning and data and experience around stuff. I don't like kind of protective approaches or, you know, the attempt to commoditize that type of stuff in local government. It's all taxpayers' money at the end of the day, and I'm up for sharing that as widely as we can. I think things like just having basic tools in your toolbox as well, like, you know, AI generally is going to become sort of ubiquitous and background and a tool such that you don't need a strategy for it, I believe, because it'll just be stuff that's happening that's enabling other stuff. So similar to that, you know, I've spent many years of my career cleaning people's data for one reason or another, using old versions of Access databases, using Excel, etc. Power Query and then Power BI were a quantum shift in that, really, in terms of how quickly you can just crunch stuff and clean it up. I'm not a coder. I wasn't doing kind of grep and regex and all kinds of other stuff to do that type of thing. I'll leave that to my son to do. But just the speed that you can start to discover gaps or holes or consistency issues or whatever in your data and clean those using something like Power BI, and that's only going to improve as more intelligence comes into those products. And they're being iterated so quickly that that's going to happen before we even know it. Often it does happen when you don't know it, doesn't it? Microsoft release push some new version of something and all the features change and they change the name of it and everything else. But yeah,
I think RPA solution there within Microsoft is a classic example of that, where it's moved to Power Automate and you've been given unattended RPA and next to no customer knows about it. Everybody that I speak to go, really? Have we got that now? And it's always comes as a surprise, but Microsoft has dropped that in. So you're quite right about iterating very quickly. But the use of the RPA solutions combined with things like Power BI, which can crunch data rapidly, is probably the future.
Nic, you were about to say something?
It was the Power BI bit, actually. I think, you know, we're seeing a lot of discussion now about the value that something like Power BI has in terms of sharing this intelligence, whether it's into operational teams or whether it's into sort of strategic level, you know, longer term analysis. And I think one of the challenges of, you know, what we all do has been being able to communicate that and be able to continuously, you know, communicate that as well. So yeah, I think you know, keeping an eye on that is really important in terms of being able to keep your sponsors or your stakeholders, you know, engaged in what you're doing. The sooner you can surface stuff, start feeding them, the better.
Well, I tell you what. And this is a question to everyone, but I'll sort of ask you guys first. What about the barriers to people adopting AI? The technology barriers, the sort of the cultural issues. I mean, obviously, Dave was very upfront to identify that his session was very much about supporting and augmenting the role of the customer service agent, or whoever was using or whoever the particular sort of system or app was supporting. But as soon as you talk about RPA or AI, any of this sort of stuff, people automatically, it's turkeys voting for Christmas, which is a horrific turn of phrase, but especially in this day and age when sort of austerity measures have sort of cut most local authorities down to the quick, as it were. But there still will be that. I think there will be few people that when you talk about AI and automation that automatically think about job losses. So how do we overcome those particular sort of barriers, do you think, to anyone?
Well, what we do, Nick, is we, whenever we're looking at justifying some software to create efficiencies, we always kind of communicate it in as much as all we want to do is release capacity, not actually remove jobs, because that capacity is almost invariably needed somewhere else. And particularly after COVID lockdowns, the councillors have got really creative on how they want to do things to support the business or support climate change. And, there's a whole raft of stuff coming that they're suggesting that the organisation do that we just don't have the resources to do. So anything that we can do to release those resources to go and meet those ambitions is great, but it never really equates to at our stage. It never really equates to a reduction in headcount.
I think one of the things that I'm very aware of at the moment is the shortage of skills to support these sorts of technologies. It's going to be very difficult to recruit people that have data science backgrounds or AI type backgrounds, and those that are available are going to be going to the highest bidders. So the need to be able to in-house train or in-house build skills in this area is absolutely essential, because you're just not going to be able to compete with the private sector in buying those people in. And the other thing is, in building those solutions, the subject matter is so important. There's subject matter expertise in being able to build those solutions on these types of platforms. So yes, I think that's, and even a company, we're a private sector company, but we operate in the public sector space, and the pennies drop for me. We're going to have to train people internally, with those skills. We just will not be able to compete with the people that are selling to banks and retailers and so on and so forth. So on the what's in it for me bit, then anybody that's got subject matter expertise in a particular service area and an appetite for investing in their own skills in these sorts of technologies, and there's a great opportunity, and there's a plethora of technologies as well. It's not just going to be working in the application that you've bought from a back office provider to do. You're talking now about these knitted networks of bringing lots of different systems and applications together, and great, huge opportunities to learn and develop knowledge in those areas, but really complicated as well.
And also,
I think that's absolutely spot on. Sorry. Yeah, no, I think Nick's spot on with that, and I think combining the comment from Mike as well, that you've got to be canny about how you account for the successes of this stuff, because if you're not banking cost efficiencies through redundancies and so on, and you're kind of skill switching and upskilling and transferring people around, then it's as much about kind of cost avoidance or opportunity accounting as anything else, and getting your financial guys' heads around that is a bit of a trick. So the traditional model whereby a project like this might have been budgeted for and then justified needs a bit of looking at, I think, to operate in this new environment. Just as the traditional way of funding things with capital when we're in a subscription world for everything is quite a challenge as well.
And in terms of learning those skills, I would pick up on, I think, Mike, your point earlier about, what's the opportunity in the back office or behind the scenes to develop these AI skills and efficiencies, because, we all live in a world where it's very easy to end up on the front page of the local rag for doing something that was probably quite innovative, but, was easily tripped up by some, somebody who had it in for you. And I think learning some of these lessons on some of your internal processes would be a great place to start. Dave's very, very well demonstrated how you can surface those to the customers as well. But I'm sure that's not without a significant amount of learning and testing and confidence in being able to surface those sorts of applications.
Yeah, I'll shut up in a minute, but to expand on that as well, that having an agile project management approach and getting everybody on board with that is really important, because you have to be able to iterate and cycle these things quickly, and you have to build skills incrementally. So just as an illustration, we've got 3 more senior developers who are working on various things, including a similar platform to what Dave's shown us, doing similar stuff. That tends to be quite labor intensive, as Dave said. There's 3 years in developing what he's shown us there. We've got some very heavyweight end-to-end customer focused processes that have taken a year or 2 to put together within our platform, and they don't get into the kind of chat and AI stuff. But we've got assistant developers who come from within the ICT service desk or from application specialist support or whatever, who've shown willing to gain these skills. And their first task was to identify processes they could automate from their existing world, and then set about those to free up their time and free up the impact on their colleagues. And that's taken them down lots of different routes, whether it's PowerShell or PowerFlow, the Automate platform, or more traditional ways of doing things. Just a macroed up workbook that takes a couple of input paths, an output path, and a date range, and turns somebody's 3-hour process into a 30-second process. You can turn that sort of thing around in a couple of days, and suddenly you're a bit of a hero for a guy in a service area doing a boring, dusty job. But managing all of that is quite tricky in a conventional waterfall project management way. You've got to be flexible and agile, and you've also got to be prepared to fail and let people just not achieve something, go, do you know what, that's fine, we've learned some things, let's try the next one.
I have a question that Dave might be able to answer, thinking about exploiting AI in the back office. And we sometimes think hard about how we allocate work in the workflow system, so that perhaps giving somebody the oldest piece of work to deal with next isn't necessarily the most efficient way. It might be the way that we might want to allocate them the piece of work which we think someone might be phoning up and chasing if it wasn't done first. Is that something that AI would lend itself to, about how we feed in some formulas maybe for allocating work in a more efficient way than just have the oldest piece next, for example?
So I think that leads back to a question I had earlier about various different platforms and artificial intelligence platforms. So whilst what I showed you today is very good at the conversational piece and gathering information, then passing it back, people like Google, semantic intent and understanding semantic intent as part of a neural net is far better. So someone like Google with what's called TensorFlow units, by all means, have a look into that. They actually give access to TensorFlow for free because it all contributes to Google's AI project. Lends itself very well to taking data and then making decisions based upon that. So okay, you would have to clearly sort of define what it was that you're wanting out of it. So whether it was the number of times that they phoned, the language that they used, how many emails have they sent, and taking all those pieces of information to then define a value against that to go, right, well, that case needs to be dealt with more urgently because of the pressure that we're getting on the service area from them chasing it all the time. So yes, you can. It's not within what I've shown you today, but absolutely within the artificial intelligence space, it is something that you could do. If you have ambition of using Google, it's what I will warn you of is it's not low code. You need to be able to code to use it, and it can be fiddly at times. But if you want to have a discussion about it, Mike, I think we've spoke previously a couple of times. But reach out to me, give me a shout, and I'll more than happily talk you through it.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Okay, so any other questions at all? Any thoughts, opinions? Anyone? Please feel free just to chip in. Hovik, you've unmuted.
Yes. You noticed, Nick.
Yes, oh yeah, like a hawk, man. Go on.
Dave, you say it's not low code. What kind of technology are you talking about? Are we talking JavaScript, or what sort of skill sets do we need to start thinking about these?
In where? In Google?
Like in Google and in Amazon Lex.
So in Amazon, Java.
Java.
Yeah. If you want to look at Google, you've practically got to be full stack as a developer and be comfortable with a range of languages. Again, it's predominantly Java and Python, but irrespective of that, you'll still touch on elements of C and database querying as well. So the Google stack is obscenely it's incredibly powerful, don't get me wrong, for analyzing data and then making a decision upon it. And the stuff that you can do there is staggering. Google's been able to teach it to look at images of X-rays or MRIs and determine if somebody's at risk of cancer. And it can do it more reliably than a doctor. So it's great at analyzing data, making a decision based upon it, not so much a conversational piece. Amazon, it is low code in terms of you're a CXM user at Hounslow. So all of your existing case types, you can just import into Amazon. Changing the prompt is simply just typing out a question. It is all low code in terms of that. If you want to chain multiple functions together, the Lambda functions, so if you wanted to query an LLPG, for example, return a value, compare it against Bartek or Whitespace or whoever it may be, so you wanting to run the steps, then you need to know Java so that you can write the Lambda functions for that. But beyond Java, you don't need anything else for AWS. And that's one of the reasons we chose them over Google, simply because you're far more likely to know Java than you are to have to know 3-4 different languages for Google.
Great. Yeah, clear. Thank you.
Excellent. Cheers, Hovik. Anybody else? Anybody else? Any thoughts, opinions, or are you AI'd out?
Just a quick question. I noticed that on the Gartner cycle there that the most hyped up issue of all at the moment, which perhaps then represents the biggest challenge, was ethics. And I wondered if anyone had got any thoughts or observations around that, because it's something we're very live to. I'm in the middle of drafting our automation strategy at the moment. We've actually got our first engagement with our head of service on it this afternoon. And encapsulating everything that we do in some kind of an ethical framework is seen as an absolute essential requirement. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge if ethics really is at that point in the cycle in terms of unrealistic expectations and kind of hype driven stuff. But is that in people's minds a fair representation of where we are on the ethical questions around AI, or actually do people on the call feel a bit more kind of comfortable around what the points of contention are, what the problems are?
Good question. Anyone? Mike?
I can't think of too many in the local authority environment, but I was thinking of the, like the Tesla example of which bunch of pedestrians do you choose to crash into if you can't avoid either. It's probably a bigger question, but not, I don't think in the local authority.
I think, like, other subjects, the public service is more diligent in this. When it comes to accessibility, for example, we pay far more than lip service to accessibility as a community. We take it very seriously, and I think everybody, central government, local government, private sector, are just starting to get their heads around data, and whether it's ethics, trust, the risks of data. I think data is really the emerging challenge over the next few years. We've been building the plumbing, we've been building the interface points, we've been building the logic into these sorts of environments that we've been talking about this morning, but it's all about the data at the end of the day. And I think public service providers will probably be more responsible when it comes to data ethics. I think there'll still be challenges like bias and being objective and handling some of those issues. But I think we've got the right culture and philosophy when it comes to addressing those sorts of issues. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be, and especially when you get into multi-agency data as well, well, bloody hell, that just gets 10 times more complicated all over again. So, and as a country, what we've been through in the last year in terms of starting to understand the use of data and how we can model data and the need for data to be of a certain quality, for it to be presented in the right way. These are all lessons we've learned during COVID.
Not truncated by an old version of Excel.